Anna. Thanks so much for being here today.
That's my pleasure.
Let's start with a relatively simple question based off that video. When did you realize you had created a phenomenon?
Well, I'm not sure. You know, I was talking to Sam Hewen and Katrina right after we met the first time, and they had just been exposed to 2,500 of you guys, and were knocked over by it. And they were sort of saying, "Oh, this is, how do you deal with this?" And I said, "Well, for me, it's like boiling a frog. You know, you put a frog in cold water and you heat it up a degree at a time. Frogs don't have a quick sense of heat, and so they won't realize until it's too late that the water has achieved boiling temperature." So I said, "You guys, they're going to drop you in at the hot end." Yeah, no, it's just been a gradual accretion, you know, of very interesting things for the last 28 years, something like that. You know, we started with 10 fans at a time, and it just sort of grew. But it's largely due to you guys, because my first beloved editor, Jackie Cantor, said to me, "These have to be word-of-mouth books because they're too weird to describe to anyone." Which is completely true. And so thanks to all of you who have gone out and said to your friends, "Well, I can't tell you what it's about, but you have to read it so I can talk to you." And that's why probably half of you are here, is because someone said that to you. And so my great thanks to the people who did that.
You famously said that you are always writing, and you've poked a little bit of fun at your friend George R.R. Martin, who's slightly deadlineless. Can you tell us a little bit about your process? How do you do it? Do you listen to music? Are you jotting notes everywhere you go? Can you write a scene and then step away from it and come back later?
Oh, yeah. No, well, for one thing, I had 3 children in 4 years, which tends to hack up your day and your consciousness quite a bit. And I also had 2 full-time jobs at the time. So I'm not sure why I thought this was the ideal time to begin writing a novel, but I did. That being so, though, I was writing the novel when I could, which meant in 10 minutes here, half an hour there. This is also when I learned to get up and write in the middle of the night, which is how you work when you have small children. But yeah, the book will just sort of stay alive in the back of my head, and it will come to the front whenever something happens, or when I have time. And when I don't have time, I sort of push it to the back and I'm working on something else. But it is always there. Now, people are different in how their brains are wired up. I don't work in a straight line. I don't work with an outline. It would not be fun if I knew what was going to happen. And so I write where I can see things happening. And then gradually these little pieces stick together and start to form bigger chunks. And I'm generating sort of a chronological timeline in the back of my head because it is historical. And when I have large chunks, I can line these up against that historical timeline, and I can see, well, this chunk has to go over here, and this chunk has to go over there because this battle happened here, that sort of thing. And at that point, if we're all lucky, I begin to see the overall shape of the novel. But up to that point, it's just chunks. It's like playing Tetris in my head, but very slowly. And this just kind of goes on until the book is almost finished and I know everything. And that's when we hit the final frenzy, which is what I call it, because at that point I'm working flat out, maybe 12, 14 hours a day. I'm not eating or sleeping more than the necessary to keep alive. And it's really exciting. It's like having an electrical cable in both hands and just having the current flow through me, because I know everything about the book. It's just there. The book has its own life at that point. I'm just along for the ride, and the pieces just drop where they should be. But that's the only time in the process that happens. The rest of the time, some days it flows, and some days it's like pushing rocks uphill with your nose. But, which is true for everybody. But, writing is a very peculiar and individual thing. Anything that lets you get words on the page is the right way to do it.
There you go. Tell us a little bit about this massive phenomenon that is now a TV show. How did you feel walking on set for the first time and seeing the world that was in your head for so long come to life in front of you?
It was truly great. It was fascinating to see how it all works. It's such an enormous microcosm, you might say. For every scene you see on TV, there are 200 people making that happen. And if you've seen some of the longer shots of the set, you can see how many crew it takes to get something or other done. So the first time I came to the set, they showed me through the whole studio. And I got to see all of the pieces, the carpenters and the plasterers, and how they would go out to an actual castle and make a plaster cast of the stones, then bring it back to their workshop and make a plaster replica of those same stones. So you are in fact seeing an authentic castle interior when you see that. And the painters and the huge costume department. And for the first thing that I went for, I was playing a bit part in that episode. So I got to have my own costume made for me, and and a wig and makeup and all that. And they actually gave me my own trailer because I was principal cast, which means anybody who has lines. The others are supporting cast, and there is, pardon the pun, a caste system in effect there, wherein the supporting artists are not allowed to talk to the principal cast, which I learned when I was standing up in a gallery full of them. And it was 103 degrees up there. I mean, I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I know what 103 degrees feels like. And I was saying to the person next to me, you know, it's 103 up here? And they were just sort of going, and you know, one of the runners brought me up a bottle of water, and they didn't bring water for anybody else. And I was like, you want some? And they were going, and then the woman behind me fainted from the heat. And I had a fan in my sleeve that Katrina had lent me, and I whipped it out and was over there fanning her to no effect. But they came up and got her. They cleared out the loft, and then they called their local OSHA representative or whatever he is. And they came down and they were saying, did you know it's 103 up there? Yeah, so anyway, it was absolutely fascinating seeing how just all the details work. And the set, of course, was fabulous. It was, Ron led me into the set of Castle Leoch, and I stood there for a minute, and he said, is this the way you imagined it? And I said, no, this is lots better.
We know that you consult on the show, you see all the scripts, and you watch it as it comes.
I do.
As it comes. Do the actors come to you for insight into the characters?
Sometimes, yeah. It depends what part of the show they're playing and if there is anything, you know, specific. For instance, in the second season, Katrina asked me for advice on, you know, being pregnant, because she never has been, and, you know, and I have repeatedly. And so, you know, I was able to tell her, you know, the physiology and the psychology and so forth. And we had fairly in-depth conversations about that, which she then, you know, used as part of her raw material for the pregnancy and miscarriage episodes there, which she did just fantastically, very, very movingly. Yeah, and for Sam, you know, if whenever Jamie has a change in circumstances, he'll kind of check in with me, you know, like, where is his head? When we're doing this, you know, what's he feeling like, and so forth. So I was explaining to him why Jamie is wearing chains and manacles and how that would feel to wear that for, you know, 18 months at a time and so forth. And you'll see what good use he made of it when you hit the Ardsmuir prison things. But yeah, he'll check in with me fairly frequently. So, you know, I only tell them things when they ask. I think he told Vanity Fair, somebody, that I email him several times a day. I said, boy, you lie like a rug.
Tell us about your first script writing opportunity last season with episode 11.
Yeah, no, that was great fun. I had originally not intended to write an episode until maybe season 3 or 4, but the opportunity occurred. For one thing, they were kind of shorthanded in terms of their available time and their available writers, and they were needing to get scripts out faster than could conveniently be done. So anyway, that's why they sort of made a space for me. But it was a lot of fun. Writing a script is, of course, different than writing a novel. I have written comic book scripts before and graphic novels, so I did understand how it is to change a story into a visual medium, which helped. But what I didn't know, I mean, I knew about it, I just hadn't experienced it, is just how collaborative this is. Because when it's a large show like that, with multiple writers, there's a writer's room, which means that all the writers get together with the showrunners and they break the script. They decide which events are going to happen in which episodes, and then little by little they zero in and talk in more detail about what's going to happen here, and can we do this, and can we do that. And then the scriptwriter goes and writes an outline, which goes back to be approved by the studio and the network, that's Sony and Starz, and also by the showrunners. And then it comes back if they need additional refinements, and then it goes back again. This may happen 2 or 3 or 4 times. Luckily, I only had to do 1 rewrite of the outline. And then they say, yes, you can go to script, which means you can go ahead and write it. Well, then that goes to the studio and the network and the showrunners, who send you back notes and things like that. Luckily, I got relatively few notes on my script. The only one I remember is from Sony, because it was funny. And they said, well, really, our only concern here is that the script sounds too much like Diana.
Why is that a problem?
Well, they said, we worry that her dialogue is very distinctive and extremely funny. They said, but we're worried that the script will be tonally different from everything else in the show. And it needs to be a cohesive whole. We don't want that script to stick out like a sore thumb. So basically, can you sound a little bit less like yourself?
So easy, so simple.
Oh, hey, well, easier than you might think, because in fact, the scriptwriter is only the person whose name is on the script. They aren't the only person writing that script. As in the showrunner, in this case, Ron, had a quick whack at it because mine was somewhat too long, because they told me it's all right to go a little long. We'll, tighten it up as we go. So he did the initial tightening, very nice editing job, very tactful. He said, I've left your voice alone, which he had, and so forth, and it just, condensed things a bit. But then when it goes to actual production, one of the executive producers, all of the writers, except me, were executive producers. One executive producer will be handling the whole block, and it is their job to make any additional changes to the script at that point. So at that point, Ann Kenny kind of took over, and so she made another pass through my script. And then when it gets to the actual filming, things change, because of various exigencies. Sam Hewen came to me one morning and he said, this scene here where I'm with Prince Charlie and the advisors in Derby, I have to make this speech while I'm walking up the side of a table and then turn around, and face the camera, essentially. He said, it's too long, I'll still be talking when I get up there. Can I leave out the last 2 lines? I looked at it and I said, well, no, we need the last line because of this. I said, but I can take out this line in the middle and we'll shorten the first one by half. How's that? So that's what he did. And in fact, they just cut the whole speech and had him do it in silence. But that's the director's prerogative, is to change things on the fly. And sometimes an actor will have trouble with a word or a speech or something. This luckily wasn't mine, but the scene where Bonnie Prince Charlie comes over the rooftops and breaks in the middle of the night and has a wounded hand, and Clara is looking at it and says, it looks like an animal bite. And he's saying, yes, my mistress's pet, it bites everyone. And Clara's thinking, aha. And then she said, is this bite by any chance from a monkey? I don't know what it was, but when she said that, all 3 of them cracked up. And they did it every single time she said it, by the end of the 5th take, and they're all, just helpless with giggles. You can hear the director, you can hear Sam Hewen at one side off camera going, this is never going to work. You can hear the director on the other side saying, oh, yes, it will. Anyway, he made them do it over and over until they finally quit laughing and did it straight. But, stuff like that just, it happens. It's a really fluid kind of phenomenon. A lot of fun, though.
Do they send you every cut, or do they cut it into something presentable for you to watch?
Well, let me see. I don't see what are called closed set takes, which is where people are naked. I see them when they have made their selection of what parts I get to see. Right. But everything else I pretty much see as it is. There'll be partial cuts where something just went bluey early on, and they'll leave those out. And they leave out, of course, all the dead time between takes, but I do see take after take. Every good take that they do, I see.
Good. If you follow Diana on Facebook, you'll know that we get daily updates from her, which is wonderful. And we know you've seen some of season 3.
I've seen a lot of it.
Well, a lot of it. Can you tell us anything you're looking forward to, or if you've seen it already, what you're looking forward to the audience seeing?
Well, let's see. Well, I have seen entire cuts of the first 3 episodes, and all 3 of them are fabulous. They're really, really well done. So I'm looking forward to you seeing all of those. I've seen actually a locked cut, which means it's completely done. They're not going to mess with it again, except that they did and came back as locked 2. And I was wondering what's different. What did they think was so important that they changed? And what Ron had done was add Gaelic chatter. There's a scene at the beginning of the Battle of Culloden where Charles is gassing away with his advisors, and Jamie, who's just ridden up after leaving Claire at the Stones, is standing next to Charlie. And I wish you could see the entirety of that take. You won't, because you'll only see the first few seconds of it, but I saw the whole thing. And Jamie is standing there and he's undressing, for battle. He's about to head out there and he knows he's going out to get slaughtered with everybody else. And his face is just, just really set, and he's paying not one bit of attention to what these guys are saying, but he's just getting ready to go die. Was amazing, but you'll see the first little bit of that at least. And then, but all around them, in the locked version number 2, you can hear all of the soldiers talking to each other in Gaelic, and it's very, some of it is shouting and some of it is chattering, and everybody's excited and so forth, but it just adds such a layer of intensity and authenticity to it. It was worth going back for.
Oh, I can't wait. I have written here your resume before writing. I'm going to have to read this right from my paper and make sure I have everything right. Master's degree in marine biology, PhD in behavioral ecology, professor of environmental science, and also a self-described expert on scientific computation. Did I get everything?
Well, pretty much. I wasn't a professor of environmental science.
Okay. When did you realize you wanted to write novels, and has any of those past professions seeped into your writing?
Oh, well, when you're a writer, everything you do is part of your writing. Everything you see, everything you smell, everything you hear, it's all part of you, and you draw on different parts of that depending on what you're doing. The people that you meet, you know, you may end up in a book at some point.
What an honor.
Probably without your name. Though I do write people that I know into my books as jokes periodically, and I do use their real names. But Sam Ewan made it into Written in My Own Heart's Blood. He was cast while I was writing that book, and I got to know him fairly well. You know, even before I knew him, we were sort of Twitter friends and talked online a lot and so forth. Anyway, at one point he told me that he had been talking to a Starz executive and had realized how much he cursed when talking, and he thought he should stop. So anyway, I wrote in this blacksmith who goes around blaspheming and apostrophizing his tools, and as I always do when I write someone really, and I sent him the piece, and I said, you know, I normally do this with 2 or 3 of my friends in a book, and you know, as always, if there's anything that you object to here, let me know. If you would rather I didn't do it, that's totally fine, just let me know. Anyway, he wrote back and said, no, he was honored to be my foul-mouthed smith. But you know, everything that you are seeps into a book. What was the other half of the question?
It was
when did I learn
wanted to write novels?
I was about 8 years old when I realized I was supposed to write novels. But it's one of those professions that doesn't come with a well-marked career path. Everybody who does it kind of makes it up on their own.
There you go. Mm-hmm. You're open about giving advice to aspiring writers.
Sure.
You've written the whole book about, what is it, writing a sex scene.
Yeah, how to write sex scenes.
Have you ever thought about going back and teaching?
I love to teach, and consequently, I will do 1 or 2 writers' conferences a year of the sort where I get to teach, not just of the sort where you go and be adored. You know, I mean, this is fine, but that's not really what I meant. I like to teach, yeah.
And speaking of sex scenes, I had a question on Twitter. What was your favorite one to write?
My favorite sex scene to write? Geez, there's so many of them. It's probably one of the ones in Voyager, which I like a lot because they're not actually having sex, and it's straight dialogue. You know, it's the one where he's describing what he wants to do. They've been separated for a while. He's saying, you know, I've been thinking about this for months, you know, what I would do when we finally got ashore and I had you, you know, available. And he's shaving at the same time. She's sitting on the bunk listening to what he has in mind. And he's saying, and then I'll, you know, do this until you start making that squeaking noise. And she says, I don't squeak. And he says, you do. And anyway, then it goes down to once or twice more of the same sort of thing. And then it gets to the end. And he said, now at this point, if I've done everything correctly, you'll be ready. She's saying, oh, just possibly. and what then? He says, well, then I shall, you know, pull up your shift, pull down my breeks, and he pauses, and she says, and then? And he says, and we'll see what sort of noise it is you don't make then, Sassenach.
Well, I know we have a lot of fans in the audience, so should we start opening it up to questions?
That would be fine.
See where we go?
I won't be able to see you unless
Yeah,
you stand up and
we
wave
can
at me.
barely see you, so bear with us.
So we've got our runners, so I think
Yeah.
Claire's got.
I see someone right in the middle, too.
Claire's got the right microphone.
Wonderful.
Hello, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
I asked you this question once a long time ago, but I was so nervous I don't remember the answer. My question is that you have very frequent occurrences of surrogate parenting in your stories. And I'd like to know where that comes from. Is it a special area of thought for you? I'm thinking about Fergus, Brianna, I'm thinking about William, and I'd like to know more about that and what's behind it.
It just sort of grew naturally out of the characters and the situations. It's actually not anything I've encountered, you know, in a personal way, but part of it is simple logistics. For instance, someone was saying, well, you have a lot of orphans in your books. And I said, yes, that's because it's way too complicated if you give them families. You know, what if Claire had, 18 siblings or something and was suddenly swept back in time? She would be constantly worrying, what about my great-grandmother? Is she going to have a heart attack when she realizes I'm gone, And what about my sister that I was supposed to go shopping with yesterday and so forth? As it is, she's only worrying about Frank, which makes it much more clear and dramatically comprehensible. So that's why we don't have extended families, except, in the offing, you might say. Marceline and Fergus, they have 4 children, and we only see the children when they have a role to play.
Hi. First, I'm up here in the balcony.
I can't see you at all, but go ahead.
How you doing? I wanted to first thank you for these wonderful books. They've really been so much to my heart, I'm sure, in most people's hearts.
Thank you.
And, they're just a real blessing to me. I want to thank you for that. Secondly, with the novella collection that you have coming out in the summer, you've done a lot of daily lines, and we just adore reading those as well. Can you tell, you haven't done much on the Lord John news story, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about that. I know it's about the siege, and it has his mother in it, but that's pretty much all I've heard about it. So, we have a Lord John reading club here, and I wanted to know if you could tell us a little more about that.
Well, you haven't seen much of that story because I haven't written it yet. But the basic situation, it happens after Plague of Zombies, where you may remember Lord John inadvertently became the military governor of Jamaica temporarily. Well, when the besieged begins, he has been relieved. He's planning to go back home to England on the next ship. But the ship that arrives from England is bearing his stepfather, who married his mother, back in Brotherhood of the Blade. And General Stanley is sort of an elderly gentleman. He's got a gouty foot and, is somewhat disabled. Anyway, he comes ashore in some agitation because they have rendezvoused with other ships along the way as they're coming back. And he has realized that the British Navy is about to invade Cuba and come in through the harbor of Havana. And the problem here is that his wife, Lord John's mother, has been visiting with the wife of the commandant of the fortress there, and is still there and will be there along with her niece Olivia and Olivia's little son Cromwell when the invading navy arrives, at which point they will all be prime hostages. Now, General Stanley, of course, is not in any physical shape to go and get them out, but Lord John is. So that's sort of the premise of the book, of that story.
Are there any characters who you haven't officially announced yet or even officially decided to write about who you're really excited to explore at a future time?
Well, there's Master Raymond, but everybody knows about him. He'll be along in good time.
Exactly.
Quick question. I hope your children are appreciative of all your efforts. I kind of wondered, you say that you write from usually midnight till 4 a.m. and then you were teaching and being a mother of 3 small. How did you negotiate all of that? When did you sleep? What was life like then for you?
Well, my children are now 34, 32, and 30, thank God. But they do get older. But really, it helps if you have a good spouse, one with congenial biorhythms. My husband gets up very early in the morning. He likes to wake up around 5:30, which is like an hour after I go to bed. But that meant that he would be able to, he'd be awake when the kids were awake, and so he could get them up and make their breakfast and pack their lunches, and he'd just wake me up when it was time to start taking them to school, because they went to different schools, so we needed both parents. They could take the bus, but it was a 45-minute bus ride from where we lived, and the school was 2 minutes away by car, so we never did that. So anyway, then, during the day, you just do things as you can. We do hire somebody to clean the house 3 times a week, that sort of thing. And that's when I would go and do off-site stuff. But I like to go to bed late. I'm a night owl, I always have been. So we started, when we instigated this, my husband would be the morning watch and I was the night watch. So he would go to bed around 9 o'clock and I would tuck him in, and then I would go lie on the couch with a book, and I would be available for, homework problems or someone on a bad date, someone needs a ride to the prom, the police call, which luckily only happened once. Yeah. They something like that, but I would be there. And that meant my husband, could go to sleep with a clear conscience and not worry about stuff. So that worked out very well, and we found after a while, the kids got older and had fewer problems. And so I would fall asleep about 10 or 15 minutes after retiring, so to speak. But I would wake up again normally at about midnight, 12:30. And at this point, I go and get a Diet Coke, the dogs get a bone, and we all go upstairs and work until 4 or 4:30. And then I go down and go back to bed with my husband. So that has continued to work for us, even though the kids are now grown.
Wow. Hi. Up in the balcony.
Okay.
So I'm a huge fan of Frank. I knew there were a few in the audience. And you've dropped a few hints in the last book about his backstory. You have a relatively small, intimate audience here, and I was wondering if you would be willing to share some secret about Frank that we haven't heard yet, that especially might help those of us who find ourselves in a position to have to defend him, because he does seem to have a lot of people out there who don't have the same respect for him that we do. And we'd like to defend him when we can. If there's anything we can know about him, that would be lovely.
Well, let's see, I do know quite a bit about his backstory and so forth. And in the fullness of time, there will be a small book probably called What Frank Knew. But you will learn a little bit more about it in the next book, in book 9. Even though Frank is long since dead, the thing is that he wrote books, and you may have noticed that absolutely nobody in his family reads his books. Well, finally somebody read one. So you'll find out a little bit more there.
Excuse me. I'd like to welcome you to our icy city.
Thank you.
I'd like to know now Frank's backstory, but I think Claire has a backstory. Her parents, they died at age, she was age 5. But does she really remember how they really went? I think there's some connection. Are you planning on pursuing any of that?
No.
Oh, okay. Shucks.
Yeah, no, it's just not interesting to me. I mean, it might get interesting at some point, but it's not right now.
Here.
Yeah.
Hi, I too have a master's in marine biology,
Very cool.
and you are one of 2 of my favorite authors who are biologists. So when I discovered your biology, I was very happy.
Thank you.
Anyway, I just wondering if all the scientific writing that you've done before, has that helped you write novels, or it's such a different style of writing that it doesn't really help you?
Well, anything that you write is a help as a writer, just to learn, how to put language together, how to make a coherent sentence, how to write for clarity and brevity and elegance and so forth. One of the best early compliments I got on my writing was from the editor of InfoWorld. He said, it was a software review. And anyway, he said, this is probably the most elegantly written software review I've ever read. I said, well, I'm extremely complimented. Yeah, but not everybody thinks about things like elegance and brevity and so forth. And a little bit of this probably depends on how you write. I'm a really slow writer. What I need to start writing on any given day is a kernel, a line of dialogue, a vivid image, anything I can sense concretely. And then I'll write down a sentence, describing it as well as I can. And then I sit there and think about it, and I pull words out, and I put them back, and I move things around. All the time, my head is kicking up questions about where are we, what time of day is it, and so forth. And very, very gradually, very slowly, that begins to evolve. Well, not everybody writes that way. A lot of people just blap things down, and then they go back and polish, as they say, and then they polish, and they polish, and they polish, and they hope there's something left by the time they got done. But, it's a matter of preference, of style, of how your mind works. And my mind works very slowly. But that means that it works pretty fast. It's just what's emerging from it is pretty slow. Have we got 90 seconds? I think we do. You want to watch me write? Okay. All right, on what I call a cold day, which is a day when I have no idea. Yesterday I knew how to write, today I got no idea. On those days, usually I will go to my bookshelf, which has 1,500 or so historical references and cultural things, and I will just flip through things until I hit something that strikes my fancy as being a good kernel, and then I'll start there. that probably won't be what the scene is about. It's just a way of getting into the page. And so on this one cold day, I picked up an old Sotheby's catalog, I have a pile of those, and this was a catalog about Scottish silver and crystal. So I flipped through this, and here was a nice crystal goblet with thistles incised into the sides. And I said, okay, that's fine, we'll use that. Okay, so are we going to start the crystal goblet? Well, yeah, it's just sitting there, but one of the things I like to know is where is the light coming from? So I'm saying, well, where is the light falling from? I can see it's coming in from the right. So I see the light passed through the crystal goblet. Well, so what? You know, but I can see the light. What time of day is it? It's low light. It must be mid-afternoon. The low light of mid-afternoon. No, the pale light of mid-afternoon. No, it's not dim. It's mid-afternoon light. You know, the low light of mid-afternoon. No, I see what it is. It's winter. I can see the light has a blue tinge. The late winter afternoon. The light of late winter afternoon, the blue light of late winter afternoon. Oh, for heaven's sake, that's too many words. Okay, the late light of midwinter, no, the cold blue light. I can see it, it's cold. I get this sense of cold. Why is that? Is it cold in the room? Yes, it is. My fingers are cold and so is my nose, but my feet are warm. There must be a fire in here. Yes, there's the fire over there. I see it. There's a dog there. I've never seen him before. Anyway, the cold blue light of a late winter afternoon fell through the crystal goblet. It didn't pass. It's low. It's coming in like this and going whoop, like that on the table. But you can't say that. Fell through the crystal goblet. Do I need to put in the thistles? No, there's no room for here, and that would screw up the rhythm. The cold blue light of a late winter afternoon. Does I need to say it's late? Yes, I do need to say it's late. It makes the sentence flow better. The cold blue light of a late winter afternoon fell through the crystal goblet and fell onto the table, because that's all there is. But I can see it's a table. I can see the light there is making a pool, and fell onto the table, casting, making a puddle, making a pool. Well, it sounds like the glass took a whiz on the table. That's not right. The cold blue light of a late winter afternoon fell through the crystal goblet onto the polished wood. I can see it. It's glowing here. The wood is polished. Onto the polished wood of the tabletop. Okay, that sounds better. Making a pool, casting a pool. I can see it's like spreading out. Casting a pool of amber light. Okay, the glass is full of whiskey. That's why the light is amber. And now I know where I am. I'm in Jocasta Cameron's parlor, because she's the only one who would have a crystal goblet full of whiskey.
Wow.
This is why it takes me a long time to write a book.
Have you thought about where you would go to, where you would write if you weren't within the 18th century Scotland and now the Americas?
No. Well, I mean, there's Master Raymond. Pieces of his books bubble up periodically. And I'm not positive, but I think he's in the Neander Valley at the moment. I'm not positive, but I think he might be there. We'll find out. I just see pieces of his story bubble up, and eventually I'll figure it all out. Not now. Yeah. Oh, there you are.
Hi, Diana. I have a question about a scene in Voyager that always comes up every time I tell people about your books. This thought comes to my mind, and it's in Artist Mirror Prison when Jamie and John are playing chess and they're talking about long books, and John tells a story about his mom and her friend, and she says, "Don't worry, you won't understand it anyways," about the book. I wonder if that's kind of a thing, because every time I tell people about your books, I get two reactions. They either love them, they want to read them, or they're like, "Oh, those are so long. I don't know if I can read something that much." So I don't know if that's something that you threw in there, because you get that type of feedback too.
Oh, yes. Yes, no, there's quite a bit of what you might call authorial intrusion in that particular scene. But, back in the day, my books are sort of unquantifiable. You can't really tell people what they are, or what they aren't for that matter, because they're sort of everything. Because I just used everything that I liked. I wrote the first book for practice, so it didn't need to be anything, and I used bits and pieces of everything that I ever read that I liked, and I just kept doing that. But this doesn't work very well in publishing, just ask them. And, and especially when I began, this was before books were sold on the internet. It was only in bookstores. Bookstores have shelves with labels. You could only put a book in one place in a bookstore, so it had to have a label. And so out of sheer desperation, it took them 18 months to decide. Well, they came very close to canceling the contract and giving me back back the book because they couldn't decide how to sell it. But eventually they called up and said, well, we've decided to, the hardcover just goes up front with all the other hardcover fiction, but we'd like to sell the paperback as romance. And I said, as what? I said, I have read romance, I like romance, but I've read enough of it to know that's not what I write. I said, I got 2 objections to this. You sell it as romance, I will never be reviewed by the New York Times, which is true. And I said, I can live with that. I said, on the other hand, you will cut off the entire male half of my audience, which is more of a problem. I say this, mind you, knowing that 99% of you are female. However, I do in fact have a rather large male readership. They just don't come to events like this. But ask my husband, but he's not here. But no, anyway, we finally came to a conclusion, and I said, well, my agent said we could insist that they sell it as science fiction or fantasy because of the odd elements. He said, but bear in mind, a bestseller in SFF is 50,000 in paperback. A bestseller in romance is 500,000. I said, you got a point. So, all right, we let them sell it as romance, provided that we had dignified covers, no mad hair, no bosoms. And that if the books became visible, which means hit the New York Times list, that they would then start calling them fiction, which they very honorably did. Barnes & Noble, however, said, well, the first book you wrote was called Romance, so everything you write for the rest of your life is a romance, including Lord John Grey. And anyway, all kinds of things happen. But anyway, the point is that it started out as a romance, and or being sold as a romance. And consequently, I went to romance writers' conventions. I like romance writers. They're very nice people, and so are their fans. But they would have these mass signings at which everybody were signing their books, and they had a bookstore would sell all these things. And many, many times at these, I would have someone come up to me holding 12 Harlequin romances and a whole armload. They would pick up my book and weigh it, and they'd say, oh, I've heard such wonderful things about your books, but I just can't read one. They're too thick. And I never said, so is your head, but I thought it many times. I mean, 1,000 pages is 1,000 pages, It's just how you think about it.
Up here in the balcony, up here.
Yeah. Hi. Hi.
Okay. I just want to say it's really fun being a fan of yours, especially with your Facebook page, and whenever you reply to my comments, it makes my day.
Thank you.
My one question is, you seem to always have shapes to your books, and you say they actually have shapes, like the plot lines and everything, and you tend to increase how many points of view you write from. And in the next book, the Bees book, how many points of view or how many extra ones, who are you going to write in, whose point of view are you going to write in?
I'm not sure. Let's see, at the moment, I've been writing with Claire and Jamie, of course, Brianna and Roger. I think Jermaine and Jemmy will each have a voice. And let's see, there's Fergus. I'm not sure whether we'll see Fergus from the inside, so to speak. We never have before, I don't think. We may see Marcelly for the first time. And let's see, it's the 9th book, so I could theoretically have 2 more. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. But those for sure.
Whose is your favorite to write as?
Who's my favorite to write as? It depends a lot. Some people are very, very difficult to write. To begin with, Brianna was very difficult, and that's because she was not a character who came to me and just made themselves known. She was a character I had from necessity because Claire was pregnant at the end of Dragonfly and Amber, so there had to be a kid in the next book. So my problem was, well, where are we going to meet this kid as a newborn and watch her grow up? And I was thinking, no, that's boring. And so that's why Claire and Jamie spent 20 years apart, because I thought it was boring to write about kids. So no, she's not going back until the kid is old enough that we can just shelve her for a while and figure she's all right. Yeah, so I did, and that meant, when I was actually writing from Bree's point of view, that was very difficult because I didn't actually know her, so I had to spend quite a lot of time, just carrying her around in my head, thinking about her and how she would react to this or that, not anything in the story, just, if I was Brianna and I was sitting here clipping my toenails, which I was doing, wearing a towel, and Roger came in, what would I do? Would I stand up and throw off the towel, or would I go, eek? And this tells you a little bit about what a person is like. And so she was one of the difficult ones, whereas Claire has always spoken to me easily, and so has Lord John. In fact, he is probably the easiest character of all to write, because he's just right there.
He has a lot to say.
Yeah, he does.
I think we have someone over there.
Yes, the character Jamie Fraser, does that person exist? Is it modeled after someone that you know?
Well, I have been married for 45 years almost to a tall redhead with a good sense of humor.
Does anybody in your life ever say, hey, I said something very similar to this at one point? Or do you ever like lift from your real life?
No. Well, very seldom. I do occasionally use things that my husband says because he is very funny. So yeah, some of his jokes are present in the books, and sometimes his marginal remarks. He is the only person who reads what I'm writing while I'm writing. I usually finish things late at night, so I'll leave them on his sink when I go to bed. He'll take them out and read them over coffee and bring them back at noon. And he has marginal notes that say things like nipples again, and, things like that. But good marginal notes as well. But he does say funny things. And in fact, the final line of Fiery Cross, if the last words I say aren't "I love you," you'll know it was because I didn't have time, or actually something he said to me one day.
Oh my gosh.
Well, see, that's why I've been married to him for 45 years.
Hi. So my mom and I went to Scotland over the summer, and our favorite place was Culloden Moor. Can you talk about did you visit before you wrote about it, or did you write about it and then visit it?
During. I wrote Outlander entirely from library research because, as I say, I was writing it for practice. I couldn't announce to my husband that I wanted to go to Scotland for 3 months to do research, especially and leave him with the 3 kids. We couldn't afford it anyway. But we sold not only Outlander, but 2 succeeding books on the same contract. So with a little money in hand, I said, well, I think I really must go and see Scotland. So we parked the kids with my parents for a couple of weeks, and we went together and, rented a car in London, drove up one side of Scotland, down the other. But we certainly stopped at Culloden, and well, you've been to Culloden, you know how evocative and how moving it is. And after we toured the field and so forth, we were sitting on a bench near the graves of the clans, where the clan stones are. And after a few minutes of silence, my husband said to me quite naturally, he says, "Where's Murtaugh?" And I said, "He's over there." And more silence. And my husband said, I can't believe that I'm getting choked up over the death of someone who doesn't exist.
Do we have time for one more?
One more question.
We'll do one more.
One more question.
I see someone right up front.
Hi, Diana. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much.
And to meet you.
Thank you.
In the Voyager, they say that it's going to begin with Culloden, and it's going to be scenes that weren't previously written in the books about what actually happened. Because when Jamie awakes, he has no memory of it.
Right.
Will you be addressing that in the later books that you write? Or did you have a say in how this was scripted? Because they were giving information that wasn't previously given. And I have a gift I'd like to give you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Yeah, well, in answer to your question, there is a part of Book 9, which I had already written before they began filming, in which Jamie remembers Culloden, or at least quite a lot of what happened at Culloden. And so I showed that to Merrill and Ron and Sam, since he probably would like to know that too. And so they were able to write so as to more or less not film anything that would be at complete odds with what I wrote. It's an adaptation, so it is slightly different than what I wrote. What I wrote is more complex because it's coming back to Jamie, in bits and pieces as he's talking to his sister and so forth. And so it's in the form of a conversation, whereas of course when you're filming it's in the form of an event and all that. And also Ron really likes battle scenes and so forth, and he had his own ideas how to run this. Most of what you will see in the film is actually film of the battle, which is, kind of generic as battles go, but, really well done and so forth. And you got great stuff like Jamie having a hand-to-hand fight with a British soldier who knocks him down and tries to choke him. Jamie rolls him over and they're battling, and Jamie reaches out, grabs a clump of grass, which he pulls loose, smashes it on the guy's face and smothers him with it, which is not anything I wrote, but it's not, going to contradict anything I wrote either, so you get these things. And like I said, that earlier bit where you see Jamie just, undressing for battle in this very calm, frozen sort of way, that's not anything I wrote, but it's not going to be at odds with anything I wrote either, and it's a great interpolation by itself. So they coexist very nicely side by side. Yeah, I don't think you will be disturbed by anything you see in the filming, nor will you be disturbed when you read Jamie's version later in the books.
There's a lady at the front who's been waiting, so we'll do this one last question,
Okay.
and then we'll
Sure thing.
wrap.
And thank you for the present.
Okay, thank you. So this is the same question I asked Sam and Duncan and the rest of the Highlanders in London this summer. But I would like to know your impression. These books have had a profound impact on millions of people's lives, mine being one.
Thank you.
Profound. And how does that feel as an artist to know that your work has profoundly impacted in a very positive way the lives of so many people?
Well, it's very, very moving and and gratifying when you're an artist. You can't write with the intent of affecting anyone because you don't know what your effect may be. You just have to do it the best way you can, and if things are lucky, you will. Okay, I don't usually tell people this unless they ask a very specific sort of question, but I said I've known since I was 8 that I was meant to be a writer. I was very into books for an 8-year-old and so forth. Anyway, I was going somewhere with my parents in a car and so forth, and I was sent to a Catholic school and so forth, and they were saying, prayers, just conversation with God, when you're quiet, just, have a talk with God. And so, I had been trying this on and off. Anyway, I was just sort of talking with God by and large, and, I said something like, what I think I really want to do is write books. I want to write the kind of books that lift people up. And he said, that's okay.